cis women have a right to not have a man in their shelter. Genuinely, this is simply bullying to bully. I love when old hags choke. Sorry.
A trans YouTuber is lashing out at JK Rowling after a huge UK Supreme Court decision. We react to this, plus more drama between Trump and Amazon, and more disarray inside the Democratic Party on today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where I take on the craziest ideas from across the internet, our media, and our politics, all from an independent perspective. Up first, like I mentioned, we're going to take a look at a really wild video that the transgender YouTuber Samantha just put out, where she pretty viciously attacks JK Rowling and spreads a lot of misinformation and misunderstandings about a big UK Supreme Court ruling that just came down, which declared that under their anti-discrimination laws, woman will be defined to mean biological women, not including transgender women with gender recognition certificates. Although importantly, they are still protected under anti-discrimination law, just under the gender identity category instead. Here's some NBC News coverage to catch you up on the ruling if you missed it.
A landmark ruling from the British Supreme Court setting out how women are defined in law.
The unanimous decision of this court is that the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010 refer to a biological woman and biological sex.
In other words, sex is assigned at birth, and trans women, including those who've undergone gender reassignment, are not legally considered women. Activist Jane Fay, director of Transactual UK, is devastated.
Because effectively what this decision does is exclude trans people from society.
But outside the court, cheers from supporters of the decision, including from one of the activists who led the campaign.
This is not about prejudice or bigotry, as some people would say. It's just about saying that there are differences, and biology is one of those differences.
In its ruling, the UK Supreme Court stressed that this legal definition does not strip trans rights, as they would still be protected by anti-discrimination laws. But the decision could affect policy decisions related to participation in sports, the military, and female-only spaces.
So this ruling is actually fairly nuanced, and it does not, in fact, remove anti-discrimination protections for trans people, but it is, of course, leading to kind of a meltdown and a lot of alarmism from transgender commentators, from TikTok to YouTube to cable news, and unsurprisingly, Samantha has fallen into that category. She's a very prominent transgender woman YouTuber, and her video about this was unfortunately very misinformed and at times very nasty, in particular towards JK Rowling in some truly hypocritical ways. And we're going to walk through them. Here's the first clip from Samantha's video.
Let's just really think about this, right? For Women Scotland, this feminist group fighting for equal rights for women, right? Campaigned to get protections taken away from trans women, right? The Equality Act is a non-discrimination act. They tried to get us removed. They did get us removed, but that was their goal, to get us out of a non-discrimination act. If that doesn't tell you the type of people they are, I don't know what will.
So first things first, this is just factually incorrect. Trans people did not get removed from the Equality Act. They didn't get removed from anti-discrimination protections in the UK. They are still covered and still protected under the gender identity provision of that act. They are just distinguished from biological women as the definition of women, in so allowing for potentially segregated, sex-segregated spaces, whether it's sports or women's shelters or prisons in the law, drawing an important distinction in the sex and gender category, but not removing protections for trans people from the Equality Act. That is totally incorrect misinformation. And for some reason, the fact that trans people are still protected was entirely left out of Samantha's more than 20-minute video. And I have an issue with that. You might disagree with this ruling. Personally, I think it's common sense, but even if you disagree with it, don't lie. Don't mislead your audience like this. And I'm sorry, but I just have to roll my eyes at this idea that how they disagree with an aspect of discrimination law, how that tells you everything you need to know about them. They must be evil. Actually, no. It's okay to disagree with a particular element of a complicated civil law, and it doesn't make you an evil meanie. It's actually not evil or mean that some UK feminists wanted sex-segregated prisons prisons and women's shelters for battered women and the like, and you suggesting otherwise reveals a real lack of intellectual humility. People can disagree with you for reasons other than their evil meanies. Now, the clips from Samantha's video actually get crazier and much more so, incredibly toxic, in particular when she talks about JK Rowling, and we're going to get into all of that after this. I don't want to end up like these people.
What I ate today as a fatty.
Good morning, fatties. A pancake, breakfast sandwich.
That's why I use Lumen, an amazing tool that helps me feel better in my body and maintain a healthy weight. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath, and on the app, it lets you know if you're burning fat or carbs and gives you tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, workouts, sleep, and even stress management. You can also breathe into it before and after workouts and meals, so you know exactly what's going on with your body in real time. And Lumen will give you tips to stay on top of your health game. You can also track your cycle as well as the onset of menopause, and adjust your recommendations to help keep your metabolism healthy during hormonal changes, so you can keep up your energy and stave off cravings. So if you want to take the next step in your health journey, go to lumen.me/Brad to get 15% off your Lumen. That is lumen.me/Brad for 15% off your purchase. Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring today's episode, and now back to the show. So this next part of Samantha's video made me do a double take when I listened to it. Take a listen.
The single-sex spaces that will be affected because of this ruling include women's bathrooms, changing wards, hostels, sports clubs, and even more insidious, hospital wards, prisons, and domestic violence shelters.
I'm sorry. WTF? Did Samantha just suggest that it is insidious, meaning like sinister, for feminists to want sex-segregated prisons and abuse shelters? I'm sorry, what? So it's evil now and bad for them to even want to keep people who are biologically male out of those spaces. That is delulu beyond belief. I can't really speak to how the UK prison system operates, obviously, but here in America, in some parts of America, in California, for example, the Democrats have passed laws that literally allow any biologically male person who claims to be transgender or non-binary and goes through a few steps to certify that, even a registered sex offender or somebody who's being imprisoned for a sex crime against women can be placed into women's prisons. And many cases like that have occurred. It is not sinister to oppose that. To think that I actually agree. I think trans prisoners maybe need a separate ward. They shouldn't be put in men's prisons because they will be abused and harmed. But to not want to open that door to biological males being put in women's prisons is not insidious. It is commonsensical and a basic matter of safety and protection of women. But apparently we're bullies if we believe this. Take a listen to this next clip.
There is so much evidence that shows that trans people are actually disproportionately the target of domestic violence and domestic assault. So we need these resources as well. But the argument against it is that cis women or natal-born women, whatever you want to call them, have a right to not have a man in their shelter or in their space. And genuinely, this is simply bullying to bully.
Did she just start to cuss out women in women's shelters who don't want biological males in the shelter with them and then have to censor herself? I think that's what happened here. And, yikes. It's just not bullying for people to not want trans women, again, who are biologically male, to be in women's shelters. Because even if like genuine trans women who've been through the whole process and who very much pass, like Samantha, even if many wouldn't necessarily have an issue with them, there's no real way to allow them into women's shelters, which even then some women might feel uncomfortable with, but I think isn't the real issue, without opening the floodgates to people with beards and muscles coming in and claiming they're women or non-binary, and yes, making abused women uncomfortable. That is not reasonable. It's not fair. It's not something you should be pushing for. And it's certainly not bullying to oppose it. I absolutely understand that trans people are often victimized in many of these same situations, And I think that's horrible. But there are shelters that are open to both genders, to men, women, and trans people that they can go to. Maybe we need more of those shelters. Maybe we need LGBT specific shelters. I'm open to all of that. But the answer is not to tell biological women who have been abused to suck it up and cope and let biological males into their safe spaces. That's demented. But I think a lot of this just stems from some pretty fundamental disagreements, as you can see in this clip.
Trans women are not men. We are not threats to cisgender women. Firstly, reducing us down to our body parts is not very feminist of you, feminist group. But secondly, trans women should not have to be refused shelter and die in the streets because you're uncomfortable with the fact that I'm trans. I'm sorry. Does that make any fucking sense? Life is uncomfortable. If anybody knows that, it's the trans community, okay? If you're not in danger, get over it.
Wow. So there's a lot there. Quite something to tell women, battered women in this case, if you're not in danger, get over it. Now, they actually, with their trauma and their PTSD, have legitimate concerns that go beyond just emotional snowflakery, because I agree with the sentiment, if you're not in danger, get over it, applied to most situations. But battered women seeking refuge in a female-only space, not one I would personally invoke that sentiment in. Personally. That's just me. And I sure hope Samantha has that same energy for people who are filming themselves crying in their car because they got misgendered and people won't incorrectly refer to them as non-binary and they, them. But something tells me Samantha is probably a lot more sympathetic in those kinds of cases. I could be wrong. Now, the beginning of this clip, trans women are not men, really defines on what your definition of man is. Technically, if you're defining man as an adult human male, then trans women are men. That is just a fact. Because it is an indisputable fact that trans women are biological males. I'm happy to let them live life in many ways as women if that's what will make them happiest. I'm happy to refer to them with preferred pronouns and names within reason. I'm not calling anybody's these are too bad. But sex is defined by the structure of your reproductive system, and trans women, in almost all cases, have reproductive systems oriented towards the production of sperm, aka they are biologically male. They can change their outward appearance, they can live life however they want, call themselves whatever they want, all of that's cool, but the facts are still the facts. And it's not reductive or anti-feminist to define sex by body parts, it's just factual. So to Samantha's other point, I do agree that many trans people are not threats to women or anybody and are just otherwise normal people who want to contribute to society. And I totally believe that. I think it's wrong to demonize or stigmatize any group based on the actions of some individuals. But you're also denying reality if you're saying, well, no trans people are a threat to women ever. That's absolutely not the case. And in particular, the real threat, in my view, has been people who aren't actually trans in the traditional sense, but exploit the ambiguity and the gray area of these trans accepting policies to then terrorize and harm women. And we've seen example after example of that, from the troll in Canada, Jessica Unive, who tried to use the legal system to force female waxers to wax her balls. Yes, that's a real story. That's a real sentence I was forced to say. I remember at the time I was working at a magazine, a digital magazine, and I wrote an article just in quotes. The title was, "Wax My Balls, Bigot." But obviously there are people like this. There are people like the trans women who I think are actually fetishists who will go to nude female-only spas and walk around with their ding-dong out. Obviously those people are trying to antagonize women, are exploiting this ambiguity to harm people in their own bizarre kind of satisfaction or what have you. And of course, that's not all trans people or necessarily even most, but the point is that it's impossible or very difficult to draw lines in a way that opens the door to trans people without also opening the door to many of these people. And of course, I agree that trans people should not be categorically banned from shelters or refused shelter and sent to die on the street. But I really don't know what Samantha is talking about here, because what people are saying is that trans women in this case should go to shelters that accept people of both genders, which do exist. Not that they should be banned from shelters entirely. And like me, for example, as a cis man, I'm not allowed to go to women's shelters. That doesn't mean I'm left to die in the streets if I were to be victimized, which thankfully I haven't been. So that bit of Samantha's rant here just comes off as alarmist and hysterical. And honestly, a lot of Samantha's commentary comes off as completely out of touch with like what the actual other side actually believes, like this next clip.
What this means is that places are now able to create single-sex spaces and exclude trans women from those spaces. We've heard this complaint a million times, right? In all different shapes, all different sizes, and all different appearances, you could say. Trans women shouldn't be allowed into women's bathrooms because they're gonna hurt women. No evidence of that. Trans-identified men shouldn't be allowed into women's sports because they'll dominate women's sports and no women will win. No evidence of that. And I even discussed on my channel a situation where a group was complaining that they were not allowed to exclude trans women from their dating game, their dating show or whatever the fuck they were doing, claiming that cisgender lesbians are not interested in trans women and they should be able to, not allow trans women to be there. And for this one, I actually have a lot of evidence that proves that the opposite is true. Lesbians love me. What all of these have in common is a lack of evidence of potential harm and an underlying motivation of personal disapproval of trans people.
So there's a lot to unpack here. And I actually do acknowledge that in some cases, people are motivated by disgust or disapproval towards trans people. And I think that's harmful and toxic and misguided. But a lot of people aren't. A lot of people hold these positions in good faith. And I don't disapprove of you as a trans woman living however will make you happiest. I truly don't. But I still think that it's unreasonable and unfair to allow biological males into women's sports and these other things that you've mentioned. Now, I actually don't support bathroom bills, like strictly banning trans women from women's bathrooms. I think they're tough to enforce and often a solution in search of a problem. I've talked about this extensively in other episodes on my channel if you're interested. But as for sports, for example, Samantha's just like beating the crap out of a straw man. Like she really doesn't seem to understand what serious, good faith critics of trans women and women's sports actually believe. Maybe you could find some people out there who have said this, but the argument has never really been, not from serious people, trans women are going to dominate all of women's sports and win all the awards and medals, and biological women will never win again. Maybe you could find somebody who says that somewhere, but that's not the main criticism. It's obviously true that trans people are a small percentage of the population, and then only a tiny percentage of them are even competitive athletes. So yeah, just in raw number terms, it's not going to take over all of women's sport. I don't argue that, neither do most serious critics. The real argument is that when and where it does happen, it is objectively unfair and, depending on the sport, unsafe. And that argument is absolutely valid and backed up by extensive research and evidence. You can't dismiss valid fairness and safety concerns by just saying, well, they don't happen that frequently. It's still important and meaningful and kind of a question of fundamental values. And also then, it's still important to the thousands of women who have been directly affected, who have been forced to compete against a male competitor, or who have been forced to share a changing room with a male competitor in a way that made them uncomfortable or what have you. And it comes off as insensitive and dismissive to say, well, it's just, a small percentage of the population. Sure, but it's objectively unfair and unreasonable. So denying it by pointing to the fact that it's a relatively rare occurrence doesn't actually win you an argument. It just perhaps, goes to the fact that yes, this is not an everyday occurrence. I acknowledge that. And I'm sorry, but lesbians should be allowed to exclude biological males from lesbian dating events. It's for lesbians, which are females who are interested in other females. You can have your own bi, pan, queer, whatever dating event for people who are interested in dating men, women, trans people, two-spirit, they, thems, whatever. Knock yourself out, please. Power to you. But don't try to stop lesbians from being lesbians and force biological males into their romantic spaces. That's actually homophobic. You realize that, right? But apparently, according to Samantha, people like me who raise these concerns are responsible for violence. Take a listen to this next clip.
When ideas like this are proposed by people like For Women Scotland and approved by the highest court of the land, people with similar hateful ideas feel emboldened to act out. I've personally seen an increase of hate on social media, of just plain out bullying, just bullying trans people just for the fun of it. A trans woman was just brutally attacked and thrown in a river to drown while everybody around her watched. This is the exact result of this hatred pervading society.
Now, I actually agree. There is a huge uptick in bullying and nastiness towards trans people, and I don't support that. You see it on X all the time. It is, I think, part of a backlash we're living through, to which I trace the roots to the people who pushed irreversible and unproven medical treatments on gender-confused minors and who stumped for absurd things like biologically male sex offenders in women's prisons. So people like Samantha Lux, that's why this backlash is occurring. It's still not right. It's still not right to be hateful towards people. You've seen this with like Matt Walsh talking about Dylan Mulvaney as like a subhuman alien piece of filth, basically. Like, it's really nasty stuff. And I agree, it's not okay to act like that. But you can't blame people for violence unless they actually advocate for violence. Like, it is really bizarre to cite some random crime that happened in Colombia and blame UK feminists for it. You have no evidence of any connection between these things. And unless these feminists have advocated for violence, they can't be blamed for violence just because they engaged in strong rhetoric or toxic words at times. I mean, Samantha, you insult and deride TERFs, these feminists that you disagree with, all the time. But unless you've advocated for violence, which I don't believe you have, you are still not responsible if people go out there and commit acts of violence against TERFs. But under your logic, you absolutely would be. Just please stop trying to shut down debate by blaming people for violence they never endorsed or encouraged. Ironically, by doing so, you're taking blame and responsibility off of the shoulders of the people who actually did the violence, which isn't good, if you ask me. And now we're going to get to the worst part of Samantha's video, which is when she talks about JK Rowling, who played a role in supporting the group that brought this UK Supreme Court case. Take a listen to this. It's really quite something.
This reeks of Rowling. It reeks of her obsession, okay? It reeks of her refusal to let this shit go. And she is the exact type of person to spend $100,000, or almost $100,000, I don't know the exact number, but around $100,000, to make a point against trans people, and then brag about it on Twitter. I love when a plan comes together. I love when old hags choke. Sorry. The irony is that she positions herself as this great feminist fighting for women and children, but looks like she's cosplaying Andrew Tate, one of the world's most hated misogynists. But it fits. Honestly, it fits, right? Rowling is not a feminist.
Ugh. So there's a lot here. First and foremost, it's kind of hilarious to say other people are bullying because they disagree with you, but also telling feminists who oppose your agenda that you like to see them choke, like JK Rowling. And by your own logic, if there were violence or threats against JK Rowling, which there absolutely have been, aren't you responsible with your rhetoric here? Now, I don't even necessarily think so, but you should practice what you preach a little bit and maybe not speak about people in that way if you're going to so loosely connect rhetoric with violence. And I'm sorry, but saying you like to see old hags choke isn't helping your case that trans women are never, ever, ever a threat to biological women. And look, I agreed with JK Rowling's older, more nuanced and moderate takes that she first had when she came out, and I do think she's become more extreme and her rhetoric has become more acerbic for sure. But that's partly because when she spoke out in a moderate or nuanced way, she was so viciously attacked, and that does make people defensive and pushes them more and more into their camp and their side, and yes, they will get more extreme. Still though, comparing her to Andrew Tate on this basis is offensive and absurd. Andrew Tate is an alleged abuser of women with a lot of evidence backing up those accusations. She's a survivor of abuse. That's pretty wild. Just because she took a photo, a celebratory photo, smoking a cigar, lots of people do that. So that's a real stretch, Samantha, and a pretty darn insensitive one at that. At the end of the day, I unfortunately think that this kind of rhetoric and commentary from prominent trans people like Samantha Lux is why we're here, is why there's been so much backlash, because it is so extreme and so toxic and so devoid of logic and nuance. But Samantha, if you do see this video, would love to have a civil conversation with you. Please do feel free to reach out. You guys, let me know what you think of this video and this controversy in the comments below, and do hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't yet. By the way, guys, please keep sending me voice messages. Love going through them. I'm going to do another episode responding to you. Just leave your first name. Doesn't even have to be your real first name. Tell me something about what's going on in your life or a crazy experience you had in the past where you want my thoughts or to ask for advice. The link will be in the description. And also remember, you can get your Delulu is Showing merch and more at the link in the description as well. Up next, we're going to do a quick update on the Amazon story we talked about yesterday, where Amazon, it was reported, was planning on adding on these surcharges on checkouts that showed how much the tariffs were adding to the cost of goods. Well, the Trump administration, as we covered yesterday, was extremely pissed off at them for this and publicly criticized them, but I actually thought it was a good idea, and I still do. Turns out they're actually not doing it. Here's reporting from Mediaite. Jeff Bezos was very nice. Trump declares victory in battle with Amazon over tariff price hikes. Subsequently, Amazon told the Washington Post Jeff Stein that the team that runs our ultra-low-cost Amazon Hall store has considered listing import charges on certain products. This was never a consideration for the main Amazon site, and nothing has been implemented on any Amazon properties. CNN then reported that a pissed Trump had called Amazon founder Jeff Bezos after the Punchbowl report broke. Trump spoke about the call briefly after a reporter asked him a mostly inaudible question about it on the White House lawn Tuesday afternoon. Great, Jeff Bezos was very nice, he was terrific, he solved the problem very quickly, and he did the right thing. He's a good guy, answered Trump. So I actually think this is lame. I think Amazon should have gone forward with this. People should know what these new taxes will cost them. Even if you think it's worth it, people should be aware of the downsides. But there's two ways this could have played out. Maybe it was never actually a thing, and this was all just a miscommunication of sorts. Or it was a thing they were planning on doing. Trump called and yelled at them, and Jeff Bezos bowed and caved and is now claiming they were never really planning on doing it. I can't answer that. I don't know which one it was. Either way, kind of a disappointing end to this saga for me, because I do support price transparency. I do think people should know how much government adds to the cost of the things we buy and use and need. So I'm not thrilled about how this worked out, but maybe you guys are. Let me know in the comments. And now we're going to talk briefly about the Democratic Party, because they're not getting better. They are still very much in shambles and kind of grappling with a lot of the same insane ideas that have driven the party off a cliff. And a couple examples, these are just anecdotal examples, but they kind of hilariously encapsulate that I want to go over. So David Hogg, one of the new DNC vice chairs, we talked about him on the show when he was elected, is this guy with a super woke past, tons of cringe old tweets. He emerged tragically as a figure after the Parkland shooting in Florida as a big gun control advocate. Well, he is making moves as DNC vice chair in a kind of controversial way, but now might be removed from the position because somebody is challenging his election on the grounds that it allegedly violated gender inclusivity mandates. Semaphore reports, Native American woman gets a chance to topple Hogg at DNC. A candidate who failed to win a DNC committee leadership role is challenging her defeat, the first threat to DNC Vice Chair David Hogg since he vowed to keep backing some primary challenges to incumbents. The DNC's Credentials Committee will meet virtually on May 12 to consider the challenge from Caitlin Free, a Native American attorney and party activist who lost a vice chair spot to Hogg at the party's February 1st meeting. In her complaint, shared with Semaphore by a Democratic source, Free argued that she had lost a fatally flawed election that violated the DNC charter and discriminated against 3 women of color candidates, and asks for 2 new vice chair elections. In February, after several rounds of voting, the race came down to 5 candidates: Kenyatta, Hogg, Free, and 2 other women. Kenyatta and Hogg claimed the open spots. By aggregating votes across ballots and failing to distinguish between gender categories in a meaningful way, the DNC's process violated its own charter and bylaws, undermining both fairness and gender diversity, argued Free, a citizen of the Choctaw Nation. So the argument here is literally that it was unfair and against gender equity that they had men and women both running for this position and selected 2 men in an open and non-discriminatory way. The argument is that DNC rules say they have to force a certain amount of gender diversity or something. It gets complicated and arcane, and that selecting 2 men is literally not allowed. Seriously, that's what they're arguing here, which I don't know if that's a correct interpretation of the rules, but I do know they do have, we went over this on the show, in the Democratic Party bylaws, they have representation mandates, quotas, an identity-based exclusion category. You can only have so many of this type of person in this position. And the fact that the Democratic Party even still has those rules, to me, shows they have not fully reckoned with or overcome the insane identity ideology that took that party just completely off the reservation. Another funny, this is just a funny anecdotal example. I won't read too much into it, but there's this centrist Democratic economist and writer named Noah Smith, and he shared this funny story on X. He wrote, "I can shout from the rooftops that Dems should moderate on immigration. I can denounce the Palestine movement all day long. But when someone said Dems need to moderate on trans issues, and I quote tweeted them with a maybe, a blue sky mob came after me and I got kicked out of a local rabbit-themed group chat here in San Francisco. The first time I ever suffered offline consequences for a social media post in my life." So he got kicked out of a group chat about rabbits in San Francisco, where he lives, because he had the political opinion that Dems should maybe moderate on trans issues. Wow. If that is not a microcosm of the absurdity of the most extreme progressive thinking in these hot spots of blue, dark blue life, then I don't know what is. What do you guys think about all of this? Please do let me know in the comments. Do hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't yet. Thanks again to Lumen for sponsoring today's episode. Remember to send a voice note or to check out the merch, and we'll talk again real soon.